the first part, like the living in the intentional community thing is just an incredible way to live. I was able to develop these internal sort of processes or like mental levels of awareness that I didn't have going in, of just like what I was drawn to and what was motivating me to make decisions and what was important to me.
That was the voice of Chris Wilksberger. Chris is just an amazing person. I met Chris a few years ago at this tiny little conference kind of in the middle of nowhere, and the room was filled with other people who are working in the design industry, and lots of the conversations were kind of around, the importance and how relevant and how different design was. And then Chris and I kind of got together because we were really interested in making things happen. We were really interested in making change a reality. And so from that point on, we've developed a good friendship, and I wish it was even stronger. And what I really love about this episode is there are things I never knew about Chris that we got to spend a significant amount of time just digging in with each other. And we talked about his youth of kind of having a clear direction when he was 18 and going into the seminary, and then suddenly everything changed when he was 20, and the paths that he took during the 1990s and sort of formative searching and discovering all new kind of weird jobs here and there. We talked about living in intentional communities, and we define the families that we belong to. And we just had a lovely, lovely time. And Chris has been foundational and important to me developing as a person. And I just love him. He's great. Enough of this. Without further ado, I want you to hear from Chris. So before we get going, you are bundled up. Like,
I am.
Just fabulously. I love the cardigan. It makes me wonder, like, how's the heat situation in your house right now? If you're so bundled up.
Well, I think two parts. One is the more bundled up I am, the less I have to run the heat.
Yep.
And the second is, I mean, if you could wear a cardigan that's essentially a socially acceptable blanket all day, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, that's very true. And that shows you the pro level of winter that you're at. When I remember as a kid, my dad running the thermostat at like 62 or something like that. And just, that's what we do in the winter.
That's right.
Blankets don't cost anything.
I also like to sit next to the window, which is right here. So this is anti-draft technology.
Nice. Where I'm sitting is in the original farmhouse of this site that we're in. But they've made it like super green, super sustainable. It's like the most sustainable, farmhouse ever kind of thing. And so, I have a lovely window. I'm watching the snow falling and, don't feel any drafts. It's kind of nice.
Brilliant.
Yeah. I love your little setup. This is in the new house, right?
Thank you. Yeah. Got some new digs. Got the dedicated office. I've lit it up for you. If I'm working in here on my own, I usually turn the lights to like a low dim orange or blue hue and kind of really go into focus mode. So
right.
This is the most lit this room has ever been.
Okay. Well, I'm going to take credit for the most lit Chris's room has ever been. Is because I'm here, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you too, man.
Yeah, it's been a little while since we caught up.
Yeah. Glad to have the chat today.
Yeah, me too. We don't have any particular topics. We tend to wander and enjoy each other's presence just in general. Every time we talk about it, I thought about one of the things that has always fascinated me about you, and we've never really talked about it, which is you were at 20 years old leading a very different life than that of a design leader, working in corporate America. So what was going on at 20?
At 20, yeah. So 20 20 Wilk, very different person, very different place. I mean, that's where we all at every phase of life.
Yeah.
But I almost feel inclined to refer to that person in the third person, like he. I don't know why that just occurred to me. That's how distant I feel from that phase. Um, so I spent the first 2 years out of high school in a focused undergraduate seminary program with a religious order, and that's a little bit different than you might think of in terms of the normal religious track, where you think of like a religious person is attached to a particular church or a parish. The group I was studying with was to go and work on a specific mission, and what appealed to me about that mission when I went and studied with them at 18 was the dedication and focus on helping people, and then also the holistic focus of educating the mind, the heart, and the soul as kind of like one cohesive unit, not focusing on any one aspect individually. And that really kind of drew me in. It's like, where do I want to go with my life? What do I want my focus to be? And what I knew coming out of high school was that I wanted to spend my adult life helping people. And that at the time felt like kind of the clearest path to doing it.
Nice. So I'm a holistic seminary.
Yep.
Heart, body, and mind. Now, how holistic? Does that mean you're like reading passages out of a book while charging your crystals in the moonlight?
No, not quite that necessarily flavor. More so the sense that to be a complete person, you had to be not only educated, not only take care of yourself as an individual, but also take care of your kind of spiritual, metaphysical self.
Got it.
And so, in terms of meditation, dedicating times to prayer, and also having kind of focus in that way.
That's pretty rad.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. And the particular order, I'm probably going to mess up a little bit of the history on this, but I was also drawn to them because it was the first religious order that was broken up because it had priests, brothers, and sisters all in the same order, and that was like almost too powerful for the rest of the church to handle, and so they split it up into 3 different orders. And I was like, I like this energy. Like, we're all in this together. We're all one cohesive team, and that really spoke to me when I rolled in there.
But selfishly, you're like, I'm going to the most powerful version of this that I can.
Well, I'm not allowed to be a sister, so
right.
that kind of limited the choices.
Right. That's a lot of clarity to have at 18.
Well, that's a lot of credit to give an 18-year-old. I think, I don't know if it was clarity so much as that felt like the most natural path given kind of my experiences to date. And there was a particular professor I had. I was studying Irish language, and so Gaelic, the language of Ireland. And just after the class, it was like, I was the first seminarian or proto-seminarian that she had met. And she was like, tell me about what this is and why you did this. And I gave her kind of this succinct answer of like, well, I really wanted to spend my life helping people, so I went into this program. And she kind of paused and gave me a question that I was not prepared for, which was, don't you think I help people as a professor?
Oh, wow.
And I, all of the clarity that you just credited me with at the ripe age of 18 or 19 immediately shattered.
Yeah.
And that kind of began my, probably the first time where I kind of, began to ask myself, like, what are you doing and why are you doing it?
Yeah. Interesting. Very different to my experience as an 18-year-old where, like I remember at my high school graduation, like recalling that scholarships were possible, but that was never enough for me to like go apply for a scholarship or like investigate what that meant. And then at the high school graduation, every sort of senior, they would list off, and if somebody had a scholarship, they would then mention, and they've been granted this scholarship and this scholarship. And it was only at that time where I was like, you could, okay. So I'm giving credit to your 18-year-old self, because I was about as naive as they come at 18. I had a friend who went to the University of Hawaii, and I was like, you could do that? You can make that choice? Wow. So how long were you in seminary for?
I was there for just about 2 years.
Okay. So 20 then was this moment. What was the driving force to leave?
It's interesting. So you don't necessarily leave something like that. I think your life kind of departs it in a particular way. And it, at the time I couldn't have said this with any authority, but now I feel like I can. It really is a lot like leaving a long-term job, or like leaving a long-term relationship, or leaving a deep friendship that you've grown apart from.
Yeah.
Where when you're in it and it's good, you can't imagine yourself being anywhere else. And to the credit of the program I was studying in, they designed it in such a way that, when you were really drawn to the purpose of being there, it was a really fantastic place to be and to immerse yourself in. And then as soon as you're not, there's lots of little things in place that kind of begin to make that evident. And so I was probably on a 6-month kind of, basically a whole semester of college journey of like, am I coming back next year or not?
Interesting.
And what does that look like? And kind of what does the future for me hold? And if I leave, what do I become? And I realized, for a moment that my inclination to stay was more of a fear of that question than a confidence in continuing. And that's kind of what gave me the spark of like, well, if you can't enthusiastically say yes to it, then you shouldn't be in it.
Right.
And so I left.
Still, I'm going to give more credit to you, because even at 20 to sort of have that decision or have that ability to say, I guess the reliance would be more on like, I could play it safe by staying with something that maybe isn't a fit, but it's safe because it's known, and still being able to sort of step away. I really thought you were going to say, well, they also had Photoshop, and I learned Photoshop, and that then sent me on an entirely different career path.
I'd always been graphically and technically minded. So I went to an ag tech high school where everybody either studied agriculture or they studied industrial technology. I studied industrial technology, so learned how to, take apart and build simple machines, engines, all that stuff, work with wood. And through there, while I was a student, they got a industrial technology computer lab, and I kind of dipped my toe into that. And for a brief period, I thought I was going to go into engineering. And I think when I was leaving the program I was in, I thought about going into engineering as well, but was a little bit more drawn towards the creative side, because I'd found myself doing show posters for friends' events on campus, and a lot of my campus work was like in promotions for events, and that was just an area that I felt very comfortable in. But I had no cognitive connection between helping people and drawing. It was at the time, it was just, here's the thing that kind of is pulling me in this particular direction.
I wish I knew this sooner, because we've known each other quite a few years, but the events program poster stuff was stuff that I was doing in the mid late 90s.
And here's
for
the
raves,
kind of like,
but it was like, I just go, so you're going to like pay me a little fee to like go draw? Yeah. Totally. Right. I'll totally do that.
I left in the first job I took, leaving the program was at a nightclub and bar in town, doing all of their gig posters and promotions. And then I also DJ'd 4 nights a week.
I love it. What was your DJ name? It was
DJ. They were given to you. You didn't get to choose them. They were everyone else chose them for you. They chose DJ Comrade for me.
Comrade. Okay. Yep. The socialist. Did you have a beard at the time? Were you?
No, I had long hair. So I kind of like a Wooly Willy. It all moved south over the years.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a very different Sea Wilk than I know today.
He had hair down past his shoulders, like totally long, tie-dye t-shirts, the whole bit.
Got it. I mean,
that was my college energy. I was the guy on campus that had the bocce set, not the frisbee.
Right. You had thriving discussions with the campus preachers or speakers, with your bocce set rather than. Yeah. Nice. Yeah.
That exactly that happened. I mean, I think the coolest thing about that for me too was, the first part, like the living in the intentional community thing is just an incredible way to live. Something I know that you're on the journey of yourself right now. The power of intentional community. And then for me also, I mentioned them educating the sort of the holistic, the whole person. I was able to develop these internal sort of processes or like mental levels of awareness that I didn't have going in, of just like what I was drawn to and what was motivating me to make decisions and what was important to me.
Right.
And so it's kind of like one of the really important things to me in my life has been my ability to kind of bring that focus and that clarity to things.
Right.
And that has stayed with me since.
It's always struck me, and I think why we gravitated towards each other really early on when we met, for those listening, we met in 2015, 16-ish, 15, at some, little retreat kind of thing. And while I think a lot of the sort of people that were attending were kind of talking more about sort of the industry guidance of design or things like that, we were nerding out on like how to remix and break the system and like unlearn and relearn and like how can you move backwards through this journey. And so I've always fascinated with your approach to, like, in some ways reinventing yourself, and we can kind of go into learning and whatnot, but you pivoted from seminary to 4 nights a week DJing as DJ Comrade.
4 nights a month. Four nights a month.
Oh, 4 nights a month. I was going to say.
I missed again. Not 4 nights a week. 4 nights a month. We had programming 4 nights a week.
Okay. And so what did you end up studying then, or doing, after that?
I went into the art program, and luckily that program is very wide. So there's a lot of foundational stuff. I got to do simple drawing classes, the foundations of color and theory, foundational shape stuff, painting, photography, printmaking, sculpture. I did the whole gamut of sort of the creative spheres, and got a chance to get a sense of that process and really the technical artistry that goes into art that I didn't have a full appreciation for before. So that's kind of that hooked me. Is there's just something about the process of creativity that really drew me in.
Right. And what time period are we talking?
So this was just after turning 20. So this was the fall after I turned 20, and then for the rest of college.
All right. And where are we in the age of internet and technology? Are we talking like late 90s, early aughts?
You can stream videos.
Okay.
YouTube doesn't exist.
Okay.
But you can find there's an idea of the internet. We have internet on campus that arrives while I'm there.
Yeah.
In the dorm rooms. I remember the kind of like the step change of going from having just the broadband equivalent speeds to starting to have the idea of Ethernet speeds.
Oh wow, yeah,
and all that, like just beginning to at university, not at home. It's like I have to go. College that's where the fast internet is.
Right.
That's a place of possibility and endless streaming. Well, at the time, I guess it would have been torrenting, wouldn't it have been? But,
right. Yeah. Did I ever tell you about the time I had a colleague at Apple who was let go because he was running a peer-to-peer under his desk?
A server under his desk. It was the Wild West of the internet.
Right.
I was learning how to kind of catch up to this thing. There was no. I mean, this is before there's any even thought of classes on it.
Right.
There was no class offered in it. I just had to go and mess with stuff.
Yeah. Similarly, it was all reverse engineering. I remember, I had parents that were like in banking and insurance. So me drawing was cute, and me, sort of doing portfolio development was, go do that. But then when it came to sort of school, it was, all right, buckle down, these types of messages. And, but curiously, you sort of, it sounds like not only were you playing around with art and all these things, but you mentioned torrents and you mentioned this. Were you playing around with code as well? Were you just...
Yeah, I was dabbling in code. I was building like proto websites for clubs and organizations. Dabbled in it.
Yep.
I was one of the people's like, oh, this guy knows how to do this, and
Right.
I didn't.
Yeah.
But a lot of people were incredibly patient with me because not a lot of people knew how to do that at the time.
Right.
So I got a very long leash to figure it out.
Right.
How
much did you charge? I wonder.
There was no Stack Overflow.
No, there was no Stack
charge. This was at college. It was the same price as everything else because it was work. They were all work study positions.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It all blended out.
You didn't charge like $200 for 3 months of work.
I think maybe I made $200 over the course of 3 months doing websites.
Yeah, but what a wonderful way to sort of survive and learn and all these types of things. I'd be curious, were there any big assumptions you had, let's say leaving seminary and now you're leaving, were there any big assumptions you had, like like this is what it will be to be an adult? Were you that type of kid where you sort of said like in 20 years, this is what it will be like?
No, not even remotely. I don't, probably to my detriment at the time. I only applied to one college and university, and that was the one that I went to seminary at. I knew what I wanted to do. And if you didn't apply to more places, I'm like, I don't understand. Yeah. I put all the energy that everyone else put into 5 applications and 6 applications into one. And it was just like, this is what has to happen. What if you don't get in? Well, I guess I'll figure that out. But I had that level of clarity in terms of like laying track in front of myself for the next step. But there was not a long-term plan. I do recall at 20 going on a trip to Chicago and swearing that I would never move here after graduation. And that made it a couple more years before I found myself here. And I've been here ever since. So.
Well, where were you in between? Where'd you go after graduation?
I ended up living in the same town for a little bit. So
where are you from? Indiana?
I'm so I studied in Indiana.
Yeah.
I'm originally from Ohio.
Okay.
And so, making my way west, I'm probably good for that westward journey. I think I would miss the snow if I went anywhere warmer. Right. I do like the cardigan season.
I love how you say I've went west and you went to Chicago.
Yeah, that's when you start in Ohio, there's a lot west of you. Right. There's a lot west of you. Right. And I think I had a couple of just really incredible professors in the art department. Really incredible mentors. One in particular who regularly would call me out because I was at the time I was the kind of student that would just stop working on something once I got the idea and then would move on to the thing I didn't understand. And so I had like a trail of C- and A+ on my report cards in college. There was never a B. It was like there were 2 settings. Yeah. And that was it. Yeah. And it was always like you can't. I remember he just took me aside after I did that for something. He's like, I understand why you're doing this. However, you can't do this in the quote unquote real world in the workforce. You can't pick and choose where you give your effort. It's about consistency and predictability of the quality of work you do.
Right. So that then leads us to perhaps maybe. I mean, you're still mentioning this professor, but that's a lot of what you bring. I think in your day to day, and what really sets you apart, from other peers is that there's consistency is a good word. What other things would you bring from that lesson though that still resonate with you? Are they core?
It's interesting. I'm just now connecting that in this conversation for the first time. It's beneficial to hear you kind of draw that connection.
Yeah. Well, the room is lit, so
that's true. There's nowhere to hide.
That's right.
I think in a team setting, and when you're working with a lot of different people, the one piece that has really stuck with me is you have more freedom when everybody else knows what you're doing and why you're doing it. And usually in a healthy team or a healthy org, additional attention comes from uncertainty about what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yep.
And usually, not always, but most of the time, that additional attention is coming from a good place, which is you are a good person delivering good work. I want to understand it better.
That's right.
I have no idea what you're doing, why you're doing it. Help me understand.
Yeah. I agree with that. And I think the emphasis maybe being on the other point, which is why are you doing it? I think,
yes.
In terms of today's technologies and tools and all the things that, where a lot of the space has moved to be faster, do faster,
Right.
has all been in the like what's going on awareness.
Yep.
Whether it's Slack or Jira or whatever updates, if you're still sending it in email or in one-on-ones, it's all just about the what's. But I think that fundamentally the more critical aspect is the why. Why are you doing the thing you're doing? And that I think
that even connects to like how I approach collaboration.
Right.
I think I can maybe even draw a line to how I approached assignments back in the day, which is like, what do I need to get out of this? And then I move on to the next thing. Obviously that bar has raised for myself as I've matured as an individual, but I will often coach teams to treat meetings like escape rooms. It's like, have your list of objectives or puzzles to solve, have your desired outcome. And then as soon as that is achieved, the timer stops. When you exit the room, press the button, leave the room. And then if there needs to be another conversation, schedule it separately.
Yeah.
If the meeting spurs 7 different conversations, schedule each of those. But where I think people get into trouble is when they kind of try to just chain 35 topics into one rolling session that goes over time, that kind of loses focus and purpose and has varying reasons of people being there.
Yeah.
It's a trap that a lot of people fall into because there's a fear of not being in the room means missing part of the decision making.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always thought of it as a pressure valve.
Sure, I like that too.
Which is attend all the meetings, but more like bring up all the topics because I'm feeling pressure from all of these things, and I just want relief.
Yep.
And there's. I was chatting with my therapist a couple weeks ago and recalled that as a young person, I was really good at spinning all the plates.
Mm-hmm.
And my therapist was like, how manic of you, right? Right. You're only in your mania. That's the trick that your brain is doing.
How valuable is that skill to you, really?
That's right. Right. And so the sort of slow and intentional, the things that you mentioned earlier about going to school and seminary, it's so foundational. I'm still curious, Chris, because not many people have that ability to sort of be intentional, live in intentional communities. And then at that young of an age, what was going on as a kid? Was that foundational to your upbringing, to your family, however it was?
I don't know if it's that deep rooted in terms of family, because my family is still very important and extremely influential in who I became and am becoming. But the piece for me, I think, was more the found family aspect of it. And the idea that you define your family over time and who is important to you and who is part of that and why they're part of that and who kind of is in that group of people that you remain those close relationships with, and how you have that choice and they come and go, and that is okay.
Right.
And I think that aspect of it was really appealing. And then also the idea that like all of the traipsings of having to sustain an individual life, like having to chase your own house and your own car and your own whatever, all the other stuff. In this format, it was very interesting because it's, well, there's a parking lot with 18 cars in it. There's 50 of us. If you want a car, go sign it out. We probably don't need 18 cars out at once. And if we do, well, we've set some money aside for a couple people to go rent them if they have to do that. It's like those kinds of things really, really change the conversation.
Right. Very different to my college experience of driving a car 2,300 miles across the United States. It was my car that I got was like my grandma's old, 12-year-old Honda. But
I drove an 83 Buick Skylark to and from college.
Yeah, I drove a 82 Honda Accord.
There we go.
That my parents were able to put $1,000 into before I left to like get it all tuned up and paint over the biggest rust holes and all those types of things. And it sat at the school parking lot for the entire year. I didn't even drive it anywhere because I don't know why. And even my friends didn't even know I had a car until I think it was like April of the second semester at school when I just mentioned, well, I could drive us there. And they were like, what? Are you kidding me?
You've had a car
Like
this whole time?
you have had a car, but thinking about the 200 plus cars that would just sat in this lot, not doing anything, sitting in the 110-degree heat, just baking. Right.
Right. Now imagine if nobody needs one and you just have a set of 50 and people can just go sign them out and they're just there to...
Sounds like
stuff,
a startup. Huh?
Yeah. Right. I think the other piece of it too, because you mentioned, the conversation you had with your therapist, that my first time going to therapy as an adult was in the seminary, and that was part of it. Oh, everyone had to go.
Yeah. I wish.
And it was like, what a gift to just be introduced to that as an 18-year-old. And that was one relationship that I maintained after I left for a while.
Wow.
It's just like, there's just kind of like this through line to work through all the things I had to work through at the time.
What a gift indeed. I recall growing up and knowing that therapy was a thing. I had a parent that went to therapy, but never actually knowing that it was an option. Or how to even invoke it as an option until, marrying a therapist, and then even then taking a dozen years of being married to a therapist before embracing it. Right. But it strikes me. And one of the things that I've been thinking about for a while, and I know this is not ever going to be the case. But we both talk about sort of the sort of people management, the sort of caretaking of people in jobs a lot. That's a lot of what we end up talking about is this being in service to other humans, I think is important. And that does not mean you're a pushover. And how can you be in service to people even when it's not the news that they necessarily want to receive, but, and all these types of things. But I was just thinking, and it made me think of you, which is, I think therapy should be almost a requirement if you are going to be in a role where you are then caretaking of people. I know that will never come to pass, but it's more like, what a wonderful gift of being able to go and work on yourself, because it's such an isolating, especially early on, lonely kind of existence of where you are maybe part of a team, but just the tools of then being able to have somebody there who's just there to sort of caretake you and help you caretake yourself.
Well, and to really have that access for everybody. I think, this is a tangent, but this is one of the complications of how mental health and healthcare is handled in the States.
Yeah.
Is the limiting factor of what you have access to being tied to what you can either get from an employer or what you can afford from a marketplace.
Yes.
And I think there is a lot of benefit in giving people the tools or the space or the support to address whatever they needed to address and work through whatever they need to work through, however they need to work through it. And I think that's true for people individually on a team, all the way up through executives on a team. And I think that investment in the individual is often sidelined in exchange for progress to some OKR or or dashboard.
Right. There's I was chatting with another friend a couple of weeks ago, and I think this is a good topic for us because I think it's a topic that we tend to gravitate towards anyway. But it's a damn shame, especially here in the States, that you kind of have to choose like either safety or your soul. And what I mean by that is in a job, there's so many things tied to that job of having, healthcare benefits, having sort of, all these other sort of social aspects of just living and living as a human that are tied to that often we have to maybe make a choice to play it safe, which might sort of deep down just, crush our soul. And you have always struck me as somebody who always chose your soul. That's perhaps, and I'd be curious to talk to you about it, because, I look at you, Chris, and I go, gosh, this is somebody who should be leading organizations. That, like, should be, right. They would do it right because they would really be in service and also understand the operational and the sort of the business side of things. But I'd be interested to hear what you think about that sort of like playing it safe maybe at the detriment of losing your soul. You, in my perspective, tend to choose soul, staying true to what is you. How has that benefited you, and how has that maybe not through your career?
Well, I think the first piece that I kind of have to mentally process that is I think there's choosing either. I think is a very fortunate position to operate out of.
Yeah,
because you sometimes have to choose to sustain, and that takes a lot of different forms for people. But there are phases of sustaining where you're not doing either, and you are merely trying to sustain. I think for me, I definitely always defaulted towards whatever kind of direction my internal compass was pointing. I think because that almost felt safer than playing it safe. And that is to say, like, if I'm playing it safe through the career route, my early logic was, well, what if this takes me down the wrong route? What if I waste my life in a career that doesn't take me? What if I don't learn anything? What if I don't help people? Was kind of what I kept coming back to. And so I would always choose kind of the more crunchy or interesting path. One aspect of that for me was there was a period after college where I was packing up my stuff and heading home in a U-Haul. I didn't actually have a next step set. Everybody else got jobs and what they were going to be doing next. I still wasn't sure. I left with a degree in graphic design or printmaking, and having studied a bunch of philosophy, and there wasn't a clear career path. I had worked in radio. I had worked at stationery stores. I had a job working for a news magazine publication thing for 4 hours, which I quit because they wanted me to crop out watermarks on stock photography. So there's a good soul compass moment very, very early on. That was my first paid job that I got out of college as a designer, and it lasted 4 hours. I left after having lunch at a Subway in a strip mall nearby. Very, very clarifying chicken BLT sandwich. The kind of the path that ends up taking me on is, I'm basically about ready to launch back to living at home again, and then kind of figuring it out, kind of doing the reset. And I'm stopping. I liked going to coffee shops and just being around people. And I went to a regular spot, and a friend was there who I didn't know super, super well, but kind of one of those really close friends over the years. And I was saying, hey, it's been fun hanging out with you in town. I'm about to leave town. Thanks so much for, all our good times together. Glad I got to see you. And he's like, oh, why are you leaving? It's like, well, I don't have anywhere to live. And he says, like, oh, well, I have great news for you. It's like, if you can pay electricity and utilities, you can come stay with me. He was living in a house that was caught up in some foreclosure legal proceedings, and they were allowing him to stay there until those were resolved. And the sheriff lived next door, and the sheriff was just like, just don't burn the place down and you can stay. And so I got this incredible gift of an extended period of time living there, where that's when I really doubled down on moving into the technology space of teaching myself how to code, teaching myself what it meant to build front end for websites, what it meant to write good JavaScript. And I was also very fortunate just through some connections in town that I got a couple of really great mentors after college who kind of took me under their wing. They let me work out of their office. They corrected me when I tried to tell people I knew Java when I really knew JavaScript, like those kinds of like early bumps of somebody trying to say they know what they're doing. Like writing my resume, like, I know Java. It's like, you don't know Java, dude.
Yep. Nope. Not at all.
So that's how green I was then. And I think, that period was an incredible gift, and a very privileged time for me to just kind of like get my sort of navigational sense together. And that I think is really what led to me eventually moving into the technology space.
You've been in technology for a while now. Sort of in this weird mode of designing, but other stuff too. And
Mm-hmm.
what, you're still in the technology space.
Mm-hmm.
You're still in it. What do you still love? And what has changed since you originally started? And more your personal view, like how it affects you. And yeah.
Got another like 5 hours.
I don't. I've got 19 minutes.
Yeah, so we'll have to go for the abridged version. Okay. I'll kind of take you on the arc because I think the arc is important. There's like this phase that everybody has to go to where you think you haven't figured it out, but you don't, and that kind of just repeats in chunks throughout your life. Luckily, the period of time that you know that you don't have it figured out seems to get longer and longer between each wall that you hit. Paula Scher has a nice graphic. The graphic designer Paula Scher has a nice graphic about this, like how your career advances. And it's like a very short step and a very short step and a very short step, and they get longer and longer and longer as you go. And for me, early on, I was very lucky to be working for a company that had a social mission in addition to a technology mission. And the social mission was inextricably combined, connected, linked, inseparable from the technology work. And they had a very similar holistic sense of like building software, but building good people and building good teams. And that's where a lot of my early opinions of what it meant to be a good functioning team came from. It was also a job that required me to travel. So it allowed me to just see a bunch of different cities and a bunch of different places and get out of the, going west to Chicago. Actually going west and crossing oceans and going east.
Yeah.
Being in a group of people and for that being one of my first jobs, one of the interesting things about the way they were set up is that you didn't really have a set manager. You kind of chose your professional sponsor. And your leadership was your office's people lead, whoever was running the project that you were staffed to, and then an individual who was your sponsor. And I kind of broke the system as a designer. I chose a really patient and kind developer as my sponsor. And no one had ever crossed disciplines before. And I like created kind of like, oh, I don't know, can you do this? Is this...
Right, let's look at the bylaws. Right?
Well, let's check. This feels not, it's like short circuited. I was like, I think that seed of like knowing that I could not be successful alone in design in that relationship is what set everything else in motion. And I think a lot of the technology stuff has stayed the same. I think there's a lot more people who are trying to profit off of saying they figured it out. For a period of time, myself included.
Yeah.
And I think the core of it is not actually anyone having it figured out, but it's that everyone doesn't have it figured out. And the importance really is a balanced team self-organizing around problem solving.
Yeah.
And having a leadership and executive structure in front of them that creates the space for them to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And every time an executive team or director team has to make a decision for a team, I kind of see that as a failure.
Yeah.
Because the healthiest teams are in a position where they get to make those decisions and own those decisions and drive them for themselves. And when I'm saying decisions, I'm saying the decisions for the product and the things people are working on.
Right. More.
Obviously, we all need to make decisions according to our own areas of focus, right? But today, I think there's a lot of distraction. I think there's given the timing, people might say I'm saying distraction. I'm not talking about the Great Resignation. I think that's a long overdue comeuppance for a systemic problem, which is not investing in people.
Yeah.
And not fully appreciating the value of the work that people do.
Right. And it's perhaps only getting highlighted because it's the people who are fairly privileged and whatnot, white collar kind of stuff anyway. That it's getting attention.
And for the software side of it, there's really you can point stories in Agile, you can work in Waterfall. All of those things are valid. It's about choosing the right organization around what you're doing for why you're doing it. And this is especially when, I spent some time building up design teams, both my own and for other organizations. And the core message I have with them is we going back to the earlier comment, tying our threads together. It's the why. Mm-hmm. It's why are you doing this? Why are you using Agile? Why are you doing waterfall delivery? Why are you having a user interview? Why are you writing a persona without doing research? Why have you done 6 months of design work and not a single conversation about how you're going to measure it? And, how are you going to tie that back together? I think those are the conversations that are having more and more clarity. And I think as teams have been forced to not co-locate, I think a lot of pains within organizations have been highlighted. A lot of the ability to just kind of have the management style where somebody just walks a lap in the office and just picks things to pay attention to. that's not sustainable in a distributed culture.
Yeah.
And so teams have had to kind of adapt to that. And so where we're at now, I think there's a lot of value going to the individual and the value of their work. But I also think there's a danger in people losing sight of the need to invest in themselves.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the two can happen in silos of each other. I think people need to own their own destiny to the level that they can. And I think when you're employing people, you need to be respectful and responsible for investing in people to learn that. I have given up on and no longer aspire to hire this 3 to 5 year experienced design person, product person. They don't exist.
Yeah.
The best people in that range are the people that you provide a path to grow and learn. And I'd much rather bring in 5 associates and grow them into being talented designers and talented product people and talented devs than I would try to find this magical little thin sliver of experience based on years. That seems to be the default.
So you're saying like investing in yourself is not how to get the seat at the table? That's not what you're saying?
There's no table. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I think the table metaphor that is prolific in design is only prolific in design. I've yet to talk to an accountant or a CFO about some table where decisions are made. It's a figment of our imagination. I think the real piece is, there's a need for the rest of industry to figure out why this role is valuable, and I think we're kind of going through that phase if we're not already through it.
Yeah.
The time, especially for product, the time is now to prove out the value that product is so good about talking about itself delivering.
Yeah.
And if you can't deliver on that promise, I think there's a lot of orgs that don't need design that have huge design teams, which is maybe, going to catch me some glares. But it's if there's not a need, if there's not a why, just because you're doing work doesn't mean it's valuable. And the flip side is there's a lot of organizations that desperately need it that don't have it.
Right. And I think that gets back to there's this. You mentioned learning and investing in yourselves. And I think there's this point where many people go through their career where suddenly they see beyond, say, the Figma or Sketch, like they see these other things going on. And it can be quite jarring to sort of see some of these things. And then, a lot of the conversations I have is like, well, how is this company still making money hand over fist? And it's like, well, let's talk about some other things outside of design that are a little more related to maybe that accounting side. I'd be curious because you talk about the importance of learning and talk about investing in yourself. And it's important for a company to invest in their people. If you had the opportunity to teach, what would you teach?
I've had the opportunity to teach. I had a course that I taught for 4 years on teaching people new to the product world how to work in a product team. It was designed for people that had never worked in software before to teach them the lingo. That was it. Here's how you talk about software delivery with other people that are talking about software delivery. And here's some fundamentals of how to do that. I've had an opportunity to talk with a couple of folks who do teach about their curriculums. I have been very strongly drawn to the idea of teaching product in a university setting at some point. I think that might be in a later chapter. We may start authoring that. I keep going back to this one professor, this one mentor that I had in college, and kind of the long tail of impact of the conversations that we had together, and thinking through what I've learned and just kind of the comfort level that I have in that environment. I have a lot of people just tell me that's something I should do, and I'm kind of weighing that against how much I want to do it versus the ability to do. But it would be that. It would be teaching product people how to get into product, so helping people get into product. And then I'd want to invest some time in teaching people who have been around product for a longer period of time how to catch up to some of the faster advances that were made and how teams can work effectively, and help them to unlearn some really bad habits that used to be baked into the way teams were managed and functioned.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of people out there that are working off of really unfortunate advice and really unfortunate direction, and they're doing the best job that they can with what they've learned and experienced.
Yep.
And I think there's a lot of things that if that investment can be made, there's a much happier, wider work landscape that everyone could enjoy.
I agree. Chris, I have one last question.
Sure.
And that sounded very interviewee of me, which is not what I wanted to sound. So
I'm writing it down.
Right. You thinking back to your 20-year-old self, you're leaving seminary. Sure. What would that 20-year-old self love about you today?
It's interesting because I mentioned earlier, I almost felt the need to talk about that person in the third person, like he, more than I. But for that, I think it would be the confidence that knowing that leaving the seminary meant that I was still able to help people. And that I think maybe even I've been able to help more people in different and unexpected ways than I ever thought I could have. And very much opened my eyes to what structure you actually need, and to be actually be able to make an impact. And there's also an aspect of maturing with it too. Because I think back then I really sought to define myself as helping people as kind of like a core thing. And having since moved past that to a place of I want to do good work and when possible be in good service of others. Brilliant. And to move from a place of defining my character by the actions I take for other people and moving it to how I live to the highest standard that I hope others live to as well.
Rad.
I've come to talk about it in like these spheres. There's like the C. Wilkes sphere of like pure joy and happiness of existing. And there's the sphere of things that I'm not that cool about. And there's the sphere of things I'm not okay with. And then there's that sphere of things I'm actively going to fight against. Right. And then the wider out sphere of it's just desolation out there, man. Right, it's just desolation. But like having a sense of that and knowing where kind of my own personal boundaries are and where my professional boundaries are and what I'm willing to kind of focus on and do and attach myself to has been really, really important to me as I've grown since I've been that person.
Good. Yeah. I love it. And still very connected to that mission that you had as a kid, as that other person, as C. Wilk the first.
Well, that was the problem. I was C. Wilk the third when I was in the seminary. I was with several other Chris's. We all started the same year. There were three of us, and that's where C. Wilk got born.
Got it. Yeah.
I didn't get to keep Chris in that exchange.
Yeah, understand. But it worked out, right?
It worked.
Hey, buddy, thanks. I genuinely wish that we lived in the same city a lot, because I want to be able to hang out with people who approach life intentionally and thoughtfully and have those spheres and know where they begin and end and take on the challenge straight ahead. So I really appreciate you, my friend.
It is an incredible opportunity every time we have a chance to sit down and chat. And I don't know what I really anticipated from today's conversation, but it exceeded expectations just in terms of the quality of chat, never in question, but just kind of the kinds of topics that we got to dive into. I very, 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 very grateful for your
my pleasure.
Excellent.
My pleasure. Today. And yeah, it's one of the taglines on my website. So how appropriate. Hey, my friend, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks again.
Thank you.
All right.
Be well.
See ya.